Nice. You're living above ground, like one of them. You and your new friend are attacking us, like one of them. But guess what, Precious? You're not one of them. Are you?
No, but I'm not exactly one of you either.
We are done with the first half of Season 1, which I defined as a section with its own characteristics. That section was quite straightforward. Buffy fought against evil beings that were metaphors for youth problems, and slayed them. The second section begins right away with throwing all of that into a loop, telling us that this is going to be a different kind of show, where the line between light and dark, good and evil, often isn't clear. Furthermore, this is where the vampires, and later other monsters, start to become not just metaphors, but characters with faces and names, inhabitants of a different world, a society that we are pulled deeper and deeper into. With that, the show brings about its first revolution. Look up List of Vampire Television Series on Wikipedia, and you will find only a handful of pre-Buffy shows that were somehow connected to vampires. After Buffy, it is an endless list, manifesting the cyber period's fascination with the supernatural in general, and with vampires in particular. And it all begins with this episode, simply titled Angel. Appropriately, this is the first episode that begins with the villains, as the Master discusses with his two remaining lieutenants, the Anointed One and Darla, how to get rid of Buffy, who is killing off his minions and standing in the way of his plans. From there we move to the Bronze, where our heroes are also getting rid of something, having a party to celebrate the annual fumigation of the cockroaches that are standing in the way of their having fun. In the first section, we were hanging out at the Bronze in almost every episode, dealing with the problems of the rock and roll period. The second section, that will span the rest of the season, begins with the Bronze closing down, because before we continue to deal with these problems, we need to fumigate some problems that were left over from other periods. The Bronze reopens at the end of the episode, and yet we will not be hanging out there until the next season. This section will deal with the problems that come from outside the rock and roll period, and music will take a back seat to the horror elements of the show. Buffy is not enjoying the fumigation party. She feels the lack of a boyfriend. But here, the vampires show up to help, as they often do on the show. She is attacked by the Three, a trio of virile vampires sent by the Master. They prove to be too much for Buffy, and this prompts Angel to leap out of his usual stalker position and finally help her. The Three also give her the excuse to bring Angel to her home, get him to take off his shirt, and make him stay the night. Nothing happens between them, but we already know that it's just a matter of time before the inevitable. Meanwhile, on the next morning, Giles reacts to the escalation by stepping up Buffy's training, leading to the first time we see him training her in the library. This establishes a running gag that will last throughout the high school years, of funny scenes in which the overconfident teacher always ends up getting totally owned by his cheeky Padawan.
Good. Let's move on to the crossbow.
When Buffy returns home, Angel is still there for some reason, and did not use the daytime to safely leave. But it seems that Buffy expected it, so we don't wonder why, instead getting gripped by the drama unfolding between them. Although they try to stay away from each other, realizing there's an age difference, the heat just keeps growing. Buffy wants to learn more about her guardian angel, and everything she learns just further entices her. When he confesses that he wants her as well, she moves in for a very steamy kiss, but then we find out that he is, in fact, not an angel, but a... Nowadays, many first-time watchers, used to post-Buffy TV, guess that Angel is going to turn out to be a vampire. Back then, it was a real shocker. The idea that vampires could be romantic and sexy was already around for ages, but the show kept telling us that vampires are creatures of pure evil, and we were not used to being lied to by high school shows. High school shows were there to teach you about the dangers of youth, and were very straightforward in their didactic approach. Suddenly, we, along with our heroes, learned that vampires are a lot more complex than we thought. We've met vampires that were known and appeared in Giles' books, but the research was simply to find out what their strengths are. Now, Giles hits the books in order to figure out Angel's motives, why he behaves like he does. And this calls for us, too, to start digging deeper into vampire lore. Angel, we learn, became a vampire in the 1750s, which means that he was born around 1730. This is also the time, specifically the year 1732, in which the word vampire first appeared in the English language, making its way from Eastern Europe to the West. But the history of the belief in dead who walk among us goes back way further than that, since before civilization can remember. In medieval Europe, it was believed that those who are born wrong, or live wrong, or die wrong, or buried wrong, are going to come back and haunt the living, in all sorts of forms. But in the middle of the 17th century, in Western Europe, the Age of Enlightenment began, which sought to give rational, natural answers for everything, and regarded the supernatural as superstition. The Enlightenment regarded itself as a movement that brings light into everything, driving away the dark, and showing that the creatures that were allegedly populating the night were just figments of our imagination. The old beliefs were now seen as belonging to the unenlightened people in Western and Southern Europe, where vampire sightings persisted, indeed, well into the 20th century. This, however, didn't mean that the common Western folk didn't still believe in the old superstitions, or crave stories taking place in the dark. In 1764, British novelist Horace Walpole published The Castle of Otranto, a story that, typically for that period, was about noblemen fighting over whose bloodline will reside in the local castle and rule the peasants. The unique thing about it, however, was the castle, which was one of those big castles that remained from the Middle Ages, with its dungeons and secret passages that led to cavernous places. There are some supernatural elements in it, but its main power is its ability to strike terror in the heart of the reader, just by leaving its heroes in a dark place, literally or figuratively, haunted by ominous things that speak to the fear of the supernatural that still resides in theirs and our minds. This is widely recognized as the first offering in the genre that became known as the Gothic novel, that showed that even in the heart of Enlightenment Europe, there were still those dark places that remained from medieval times. The year 1790 is the year I define as the beginning of the modern age, which replaces the Age of Enlightenment, or the Classical Age as it is sometimes called. The Classical Age was driven by the belief that the human mind, created by God, is capable of understanding everything about the world, and so its mission is to bring light everywhere and drive away the darkness of ignorance and superstition, which lead to war and suffering. The modern age begins with the insight that man is not yet capable of bringing light everywhere, because man is not complete yet. He still needs to mature, to progress through history until he achieves full actualization and full enlightenment. In other words, there is still darkness within man himself, darkness that needs to be overcome. Man, not just the world, thus became an object of exploration for the human mind, aiming to bring light to it. But some believed that the answers would actually come through these so-called dark regions of man. The Romantic movement claimed that the human mind cannot figure out how to bring happiness to humanity, and instead, we should rely on our irrational faculties, like emotions, intuitions, creativity, etc. Romantic literature and poetry glorified the dark of night, where everything becomes as one, and looked for its answers there. The Gothic novel, as a result, achieved greater respectability. The Gothic novel drew from the original Gothic period, which was the latter stage of the Middle Ages, but there was a radical difference. The gargoyles and other monsters of Gothic art were creatures that were part of the everyday life of people. They truly believed in their existence, believed that they are affecting human lives. In modern Gothic novels, they have no ground in reality. If the novel was to gain any respect as an artistic piece, it had to use the supernatural as metaphor for the dark sides of man. The Gothic novel also gave birth to the detective novel, as its detectives would investigate cases that seemed to involve the supernatural, but eventually showed that there is a rational explanation. The detective novels became hugely popular in the beginning of the 20th century, one more aspect of the Enlightenment side of the modern age, intending to shed light on dark places. Meanwhile, the other side of the Gothic novel, the one that was about the supernatural, developed by the 20th century into three distinguishable genres: science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and the latter is the one we are most interested in here. In the pop age, where we are looking for ways to enhance our daily lives, horror provides thrills that many people find rewarding. In a previous discussion, we've noted how the rise of the human sciences at the end of the 19th century, like psychology, sociology, and criminology, took a lot away from the mystique of the realist authors, who prior to that were seen as those who see the deepest into human nature. This, however, opened up the field for the horror writers, who took everything they learned from the human sciences and made stories out of it. Horror fiction, especially in the rock and roll period, is usually rooted in contemporary life, and the supernatural brings forth social and psychological issues that our society grapples with. In the 1980s, the horror genre reached the peak of its popularity, driven mainly by American authors dealing with the dark sides of life in the country that was now the center of the so-called enlightened world. Thus, the rational mind incorporated the supernatural, made it work in its service. While some people still believe in ghosts, nobody seriously believes in the existence of any of the other supernatural creatures, like vampires. One question remains, though. We have in our archives many detailed reports about vampires terrorizing Eastern European towns, with many witnesses that attested to their validity. How can we explain this? Well, says the rational person, the belief in the supernatural was strong in those people, so strong that it affected their psychology and made them see things that weren't there. But, hang on, if we accept this explanation, then a small doubt starts to creep in. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's we who are slaves to superstition, and have such a strong belief in the inexistence of the supernatural that we can't see reality for what it is. This is exactly the premise of Buffy, and this premise grants the show a lot of artistic freedom. It started out quite rational. We saw our heroes encountering an unfathomable danger, doing detective work, and figuring out who the culprit is, allowing Buffy to slay them. The detective work, admittedly, didn't reveal a rational scientific explanation, but actually affirmed the existence of the supernatural. But it always felt like the supernatural is just a metaphor for real-world problems faced by the youth. Here, however, the show goes a step further. Suddenly, the supernatural world becomes three-dimensional, populated by characters who are not just metaphors, but have a life of their own. The world of the vampires is about to be expanded, not just for the show but for pop culture at large. But before we see how they did that, we need to discuss the place that vampires take in our culture. Let's go back once again. As mentioned, while tales of vampires thrived in Eastern Europe, Western Europe was going through the Age of Enlightenment. But this doesn't mean that people stopped believing in cases of dead people attacking the living. It just meant that they stopped blaming it on the devil, or on witches, and instead took a rational, scientific approach towards it. When the vampire was made known in the West, some scholars started to explore this Eastern European phenomenon. At this point, vampires were distinguished by only a few things. 1. That they were corporeal, unlike apparitions. 2. That they rose from their graves at night and returned to them before dawn. And 3. That they would suck the blood of the living, turning them into vampires as well. Those scholars treated this creature as an actual being and gave explanations that were a combination of religion and science. This, predictably, incurred the ire of Voltaire, one of the most significant philosophers of the Enlightenment, and the most scathing voice against any kind of supernatural beliefs. In 1770, as part of the project that he called Philosophical Dictionary, he dedicated a lengthy entry to the vampire, and, in a tongue dripping with sarcasm, described and mocked the attempts to take the superstition seriously, branding them a silly fad. But if Voltaire thought that this would put the vampire back in his coffin, he was gravely mistaken. The fad refused to die. Once the Romantic period arrived, with its fascination with the night, the vampire became a titillating figure for artists. In 1819, Romantic British writer John William Polidori published a novella called The Vampire, sparking a vampire craze. Vampires became part of popular culture. And they remain so ever since. For the modern mind, the vampire represented everything about the night, about the darkest parts of the human spirit. For starters, it represented, all at once, both death and immortality, two of the most unfathomable concepts plaguing the human mind. It also represented the work of the devil, still messing things up, even in a growingly secularized Europe. His method of killing had something erotic about it, bringing together sex, horror, and death. Finally, the vampire never grew older, thus challenging the modern notion that you should mature and actualize yourself. Some of the greatest poets of the 19th century featured the vampire in their work, and the Gothic novelists went even further, starting to explore the myths around the vampire, and around other living dead creatures, slowly weaving them together to create a coherent picture, endowing the vampire with more traits. To that we must add the stories that came from South America, about actual bats that feed by sucking the blood of other animals. Early in the century, this family of bat was officially named the vampire bat, and its features, in turn, were adopted into the literary figure of the vampire. All of this culminated in the 1897 novel Dracula, by British novelist Bram Stoker, which cemented the attributes of the vampire, shortly before the pop age took over and made Dracula a pop icon. The novel contains the figure of Abraham Van Helsing, the supernatural's answer to the rational sleuths of the detective novels, who is an expert on vampires, and taught us all how to recognize them, how to protect ourselves from them, and how to kill them. The vampires continued to live on into the horror novels of the pop age, and of course in its cinema. In the rock and roll period, with its focus on sex and youth, vampires reached a new level of popularity, and some horror writers, especially Anne Rice, started to develop the world of the vampires, making them heroes with their own problems and aspirations, not just a threat to humanity. On screen, however, vampires remained two-dimensional. Books were for nerds, who were happy to explore different realities, but the cool kids of the rock and roll period were connected to the real world, to the moment, and didn't really care about fictional worlds. This is why Giles, our Van Helsing, has a very two-dimensional view of them. In fact, this is when we begin to realize that Giles, and the Watcher Order he represents, actually don't know much about the vampires they are sworn to protect us from. A lot of the things Giles told us about vampires, since the beginning of the show, turn out to be inaccurate. In the beginning of this episode, Giles still seems to be all-knowing, as he figures out the identity of the vampire trio that attacked Buffy.
It seems you encountered the three. Warrior vampires. Very proud and very strong.
How is it you always know this stuff? You always know what's going on. I never know what's going on.
When it comes to Angel, however, Giles is flummoxed.
Angelus leaves Ireland, wreaks havoc in Europe for several decades, and then about 80 years ago, the most curious thing happens. He comes to America, shuns other vampires, and lives alone. There's no record of him hunting here.
So he is a good vampire. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being someone who's killing and maiming every night, and 1 being someone who's not.
I say that there's no record, but vampires hunt and kill. It's what they do.
Fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly.
He could have fed on me. He didn't.
Question. 100 years or so before he came to our shores, what was he like then?
Like all of them. A vicious, violent animal.
Giles thinks all vampires are the same. He calls them animals, suggesting that they are creatures driven by instinct alone. But we already witnessed that this is not the case. The Master and Angel, our 2 recurring vampires, have very different and distinct personalities, and they display actions and motives that go way beyond instinct. Darla is back, for the first time since the pilot, and she's another very interesting character. But maybe Giles is right about them all being similarly vicious and violent. Here, too, Buffy senses that something doesn't add up.
What was he doing? Why was he good to me? Was it all some part of the Master's plan? It doesn't make sense.
But her confusion is then interrupted by Cordelia.
Where did you get that dress? This is a one-of-a-kind Todd Oldham. Do you know how much this dress cost? Is this a knockoff? This is a knockoff, isn't it? Some cheesy knockoff. This is exactly what happens when you sign these free trade agreements.
I think we have problems.
Yeah, except that it's the same problem. Can something seem identical and yet be different? For most of us, these two dresses seem exactly the same, but Cordelia sees a huge difference in quality between an original Todd Oldham and a knockoff. Is it possible that Angel possesses some quality that makes him different?
Okay, so here's something I gotta know. When Angel kissed you, before he turned into... How was it?
Unbelievable.
Wow. And it is kind of novel how he'll stay young and handsome forever, although you'll still get wrinkly and die. And oh, what about the children? I'll be quiet now.
No, it's okay. I need to hear this. I need to get over him so I can...
So that you can...
So Angel, unlike other vampires, makes Buffy feel good. But this is nothing new, and doesn't change the picture. Pop-age vampires are sexy symbols of youth, as the girls point out here, but they are also evil. Buffy realizes she should kill Angel, but she still can't bring herself to do it. She senses that there's something more about Angel, that makes him different from any other vampire pop culture gave us before. Giles, to his credit, also realizes quickly that he was wrong about painting all vampires with the same brush.
This is no ordinary vampire, if there is such a thing.
While our heroes grapple with these questions, the world of the vampires is being developed in front of our eyes. The show still doesn't have the rules quite nailed down yet, and we see uninvited vampires manage to partly enter a house, or even casting a reflection. This will soon be sorted out, so what we should focus on is the dialogue between the vampires. We already know that the Master has a master plan, to overthrow humanity's rule on Earth, and bring back the time when demons ruled it. If we take it metaphorically, it means someone who wants to reverse the effects of the Enlightenment, bring darkness back to where it brought light, plunge us back into the medieval mindset. This already makes him special, as previous vampires of literature and cinema were mostly content living in the world humans have created. But the show was about to give us something even more special. After the three fail to eliminate Buffy, the Master has them killed, just for the fun of it, and agrees to allow Darla to try out her plan. And her plan involves Angel, as the vampires start to tell us more about him.
Angel. He was the most vicious creature I ever met. I miss him.
So do I.
So, he wasn't like the rest of them, as Giles suggested, but worse. But we still can't square this with our Angel. We also learned that Angel and Darla have a history, the first time we learned that vampires can have a sexual, and even a romantic, relationship.
Remember Budapest? Turn of the century? You were such a bad boy during that earthquake.
You did some damage yourself.
Is there anything better than a natural disaster?
15 years later, in The Avengers, Whedon wrote about two other characters that have a shared history, and, perhaps being self-referential, placed it in Budapest as well. The offhand remark about Budapest in that movie ended up reverberating through the Marvel Cinematic Universe for years. If you're interested in my take on the MCU, you can find a link to the book I wrote about it in the description. It originates here, and I thought that maybe it's because Budapest had an earthquake at the turn of the century, but there is no record of such an earthquake in either century they were together. But Budapest is the capital of Hungary, and Hungary is one of the main places the myth of the vampire originated from. So this could be the connection. Darla's plan is to have Angel kill Buffy, and thus bring him back to the fold, back to being an agent of darkness. She stages an attack on Joyce and frames him for it, finally convincing Buffy that she should kill him. The showdown takes place, naturally, in the closed-down Bronze. it's time for our heroes to do some fumigation of their own.
I know you're there. And I know what you are.
Do you? I'm just an animal, right?
You're not an animal. Animals I like.
Let's get it done.
Buffy distinguishes Angel from animals because animals are not evil. She knows she must kill evil, so she goes after Angel, but there is still doubt in her heart. Darla was hoping Angel would be forced to kill Buffy once she goes after him, but Angel, we find out, wants Buffy to kill him. And here is where we see the difference between humans and vampires. Earlier, we saw the three offering their lives to the Master, and him accepting the offer, even though it means he loses warriors in the battle against the Slayer, just for the little fun it could bring him. Buffy, on the other hand, realizes that Angel offering his life means he isn't evil, and refrains from killing him. Meanwhile, Giles and Xander, even though they both think Angel should be slain, rush to tell Buffy it wasn't Angel who attacked her mother. Vampires may not be mindless animals, but what they do lack is compassion. Our heroes have compassion, and this is why Darla's plan fails. But we still need to find out, what is Angel's story?
For 100 years, I offered an ugly death to everyone I met. And I did it with a song in my heart.
What changed?
Fed on a girl about your age. Beautiful. Dumb as a post. But a favorite among her clan.
Her clan?
The Romani. Gypsies. The elders conjured the perfect punishment for me. They restored my soul.
What, they were all out of boils and blinding torment?
When you become a vampire, the demon takes your body, but it doesn't get your soul. That's gone. No conscience, no remorse. It's an easy way to live. You have no idea what it's like to have done the things I've done. And to care.
And here is where the show creates what was, for me, the most interesting vampire pop culture came up with up to that moment. Angel looks like other vampires, but he has a quality that makes him different, and that quality is a soul. But what is a soul? This has always been a big philosophical conundrum. Ever since antiquity, every culture had a slightly different understanding of what a soul is. The most common answer given in the West is that the soul is a spiritual entity that enters the material body at birth and leaves it after death. The soul, in this worldview, is the identity of a person, their personality, their essence, while the body is just an outer shell, a vessel used by the soul. Going with this perception, it would mean that Angel's soul left his body when he was turned, and the demon took over his body instead. Once the gypsies returned his soul, he went back to being the human person that he was, and while the demon still resides in him, it is no longer who he is. That would chime with what Giles told us in the pilot.
You listen to me. Jesse is dead. You have to remember that when you see him, you're not looking at your friend. You're looking at the thing that killed him.
And this has a similar thing in this episode as well.
A vampire isn't a person at all. It may have the movements, the memories, even the personality of the person that it took over, but it's still a demon at the core. There is no halfway.
This is pretty clear-cut. But it isn't that clear-cut, is it? Jesse doesn't become a completely different person when he turns. His character changes, but he still has the same memories, and he is still driven by some of the same desires. While the other vampires take over the bronze to serve the Master's harvest, he still wants Cordelia. The demon that took over Jesse has no memories of its own, and Angel's soul doesn't have any recollection of where it was in the century and a half it spent out of his body. The only thing that exists are the memories contained in the material brain, and our memories are a big part of what determines our personality. Giles does concede that part of the personality is maintained, but in that case, is it really a completely different person? Remember, we were told that vampires are a hybrid of humans and demons. They all have a human side and a demon side. So the human isn't completely gone once he gets turned. The human is still there, still part of what makes up the vampire. Giles' characterization is not accurate. This explains the Anointed One, whom we get to know here. The Master was expecting a great warrior who will help him. When the Anointed One turns out to be a kid, we find that his only power is that he holds some sort of magical spell over other vampires. Apart from that, he is just a little boy. This, however, makes him more evil, because he didn't have time to develop much of a human personality, so he doesn't have character like other vampires. He is pure evil, and his presence drives the Master to detach from his emotions, a residue of humanity, and focus on doing evil. Let's turn back to Angel. The Angel that Buffy knows is not the human that he was before he was turned, that has returned into the body and is plagued by the memories of what a demon did while owning it. That would have made the Gypsy curse a stupid curse that punishes the wrong guy. No, it is the actual vampire who has the soul, and has to deal with the atrocities that he committed. The reason that he is so different from the evil Angelus is that he went through a whole century of torment that changed him. So what is a soul, then? We shall continue to grapple with this question as we go along, but one thing that seems certain is that the soul is the part that contains compassion, remorse, and conscience. The curse put on Angel returned his compassion, and this made his human side stronger than his demon side, and prevented him from going on killing. The century that passed since also made him develop a softer personality, the one that Buffy knows, and it is the thing that makes him feel closer to humans than to vampires. And Buffy, upon realizing it, accepts Angel as part of humanity, giving him the acceptance that he needed to truly become good. But then, Darla intervenes.
I made him. There was a time when we shared everything, wasn't there, Angelus? You had a chance to come home, to rule with me in the Master's court for 1,000 years, but you threw that away because of her. You love someone who hates us. You're sick, and you'll always be sick. And you'll always remember what it was like to watch her die. You don't think I came alone, do you?
I know I didn't.
Scary. Scarier.
Realizing she failed to bring Angel to her side, Darla takes matters into her own hands. And this leads us to our rock and roll moment. We said that in this section we are moving away from rock and roll, towards the horror elements, and this moment is a perfect encapsulation of it. Attempting to throw Darla off, Giles turns on the flickering strobe light machine, the same machine that earlier provided the lighting for the dance floor on which Cordelia was dancing, and Xander was doing whatever you call this. Now, it serves as the scenery for a scary showdown, giving Darla the hellish background she deserves. She is terrifying indeed, but she doesn't expect Angel, who marks his new commitment to the side of good by symbolically killing the thing that made him evil.
Angel?
Darla is gone, but not forgotten. When you rewatch the show for the first time, it is startling to realize that she was only in the pilot episode and in this episode. In her short screen time, Julie Benz gives her so much personality and pizzazz that she leaves an indelible mark, a creature full of evil, whimsy, sexiness, and power. She does a lot to help the show find its footing. Once the Buffyverse took off, it became apparent that killing her so quickly was a mistake, and a comeback tour the Force, was inevitable. The fallout from her killing by Angel will have dramatic effects. The Master reacts badly to the loss of his favorite protege, and the fact that it was Angel who killed her almost crushes him. But the Anointed picks him up and leads him by the hand, symbolizing taking him away from any such emotions, any residue of humanity, towards pure evil. Buffy, meanwhile, takes Angel back, and they agree that romance would be wrong, and they should keep it to the professional level, which of course immediately leads to passionate kissing. The last image, of the vampire's heart being marked by a cross, is a beautiful metaphor of light spreading and defeating the dark.
It's just painful. I know. See you around.
That is all that I can do.
This is lovely and romantic indeed, but not everyone thinks so. Watching the YouTube reactions, I've seen some reactors criticizing this love story, claiming it is wrong to show love between a couple that has such a big age difference. So I want to close this video by saying a few words about that. In our discussion of Teacher's Pets, we talked about the change in perception about such relationships. How, after the rock and roll period regarded it as awesome that an older person would come and teach you, the teenager, all about the pleasures of sex, the cyber period regards it as creepy. We said it has to do with the fact that the sexual revolution rebelled against all religious taboos on sex, and believed there should be no rules stifling sex. But then we realized that some sexual relationships are bad for you, and new rules developed, revolving around the concept of consent between adults. Since minors are not adults, they are perceived as unable to give consent, and an adult seducing a minor is therefore a creep. Hence, some viewers, who grew up on the new rules, recoil when they see the relationship between Angel and Buffy. But are they justified?
I'm older than you, and this can't ever... I better go.
How much older?
I should.
Angel is not some creep trying to seduce a teenager. He is fully aware that he shouldn't, as is Buffy. And yet, they helplessly fall into it, and they fall because they are in love. For those naysayers out there, I have to ask, seriously? You want to impose rules on love? The idea that it is wrong for two people from different age groups to have a relationship comes from the realization that they have a very different mindset, and it could be unhealthy for the young person to become involved with an older, much more experienced person. This is true, but any intimate relationship has problems, and can be somewhat unhealthy. The question is if what they have in common outweighs the differences. It could be argued that Buffy has a lot more in common with Angel than with any boy her age. But never mind that. When we are talking about love, it outweighs almost anything. A couple in love should be together, and if it doesn't work, well, you just break it off. The bad effects will still be worth it. I feel like today's young people lost a taste for stories about tragic romance, about impossible love that tries to win, even though it is obviously doomed to fail. You guys are so busy shipping everybody, and worrying about the success of your ship, that you forgot what a good love story is about. For time immemorial, we used to believe that love is above all, so we actually enjoyed stories of inappropriate, and preferably impossible, love. Cultures always try to impose rules about who you are not allowed to couple with, and couples breaking those rules were heroes, affirming the divinity of love. We finally managed to defeat the old cultural norms that stood in the way of such lovers, and here you come, trying to establish new oppressive rules. What we have here is a wonderful story of forbidden love, of star-crossed lovers, not just because of the age difference, but because it is love between a vampire and a slayer. The awareness of the problematic nature of this love affair is good, and will become a very crucial plot point. But where there's love, you should root for it despite the problems. If you think that age difference should stand in the way of two people who are in love, then you, my friend, have become the one who represents the dark.